welcome. We've got lots and lots of new folks here, and we have longstanding 31st Street members. My name is Corey Amron, and I am a stand-in for Lisa Herrick, who is taking a well-deserved vacation in a very far away time zone. Special thanks to our co-hosts. Jim, I don't know if you can put that screen back up so we can see them. Great. It's amazing how many people you've brought to this event, and we really appreciate it. So as you may know, Lisa Herrick founded 31st Street 7 years ago with 30 people in her living room on 31st Street in Washington, D.C. If you didn't know, that's how we got our name. Now we have 1,700 people, and we're going strong because of our strategic leadership, our specific focuses, and all of you are active members. I, for one, consider myself to be sane because of 31st Street. It's taught me how to be a more effective canvasser, really great opportunities to write letters and postcards that actually make a difference. They've coached me on fundraising and helped me communicate much more effectively about elections and candidates. And if not for them channeling my energy and my anxiety, I'd be running around the block screaming. So if you're a 31st Street junkie like me, you may know that so far this year, we've supported a number of types of groups in key states. So for instance, effective state Democratic parties who are doing year-round organizing, impactful grassroots groups that can extend our reach beyond what we can personally do. And then later this year, our leadership will put together slates of candidates for your consideration, people who can win, but they need help, and they're not a shoo-in. So you'll have a variety of ways to help swing those districts blue. So watch this space. Today, we're going to support 3 grassroots groups in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And we're going to hear from Mandela Barnes, who is a former lieutenant governor of Wisconsin and now head of Power to the Polls, Wisconsin. We'll hear from Diana Robinson, co-deputy director of Make the Road in Pennsylvania. And we'll hear about Wisconsin's native vote. So just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, please put all of your questions in the chat, and we'll answer them at the end of the guest presentations. We always finish on time, 8 o'clock Eastern time, but you're welcome to stay afterwards to make sure that your questions are answered. The donation links will be put in the chat, and you can donate either during the presentations or afterwards. And we encourage you also to send the link to your network, and we'll send that off to you later. As a reminder, as Mary said, not 1 cent goes to 31st Street. It all goes directly to the groups that we've chosen through Act Blue. So thank you again to our co-hosts. You too can be a co-host of the next fundraiser. It's so incredibly easy. You just take the material that 31st Street sends you and just click and send it to your network. So it's probably, a huge understatement to say that this upcoming election is incredibly crucial one. And if you're like me, you're going to want to wake up on November 6th and say, I did all I could to ensure democracy. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Jim Shelton, who unfortunately has a little bit of laryngitis, but he's our 31st Street political analyst extraordinaire. And he's going to give us some background and introduce our guests. So Jim, take it away.
Right. Hopefully just a little bit of laryngitis. Can people hear me? If not, you might have to turn up your volume a little bit. Sorry about that. These things happen. And I'm just going to jump right into my shared screen here. Amazing set of people here. Okay, so a lot of familiar faces, but a few folks that really don't know us. I won't spend a lot of time orienting people about us, but just to try to give you some sense that we're really pretty systematic, and we work very hard to trying to find really good opportunities for your investments and our investments. We look for really high leverage opportunities, and sometimes that means what we call zigging when other people are zagging, which is, I think, pretty self-evident what that means. But a lot of times there are a lot of folks doing one thing, and the marginal benefit isn't all that great. So we think we look hard for other kinds of things. And that's what we're talking about tonight. And just to lay out kind of how we see things right at the moment overall and what we're trying to do. The first thing is, in terms of the zigging and zagging, there is a super huge amount of money direct funding for the federal races, Biden, Senate, pretty much any House seat, or they will. And that's great. We're out raising the Republicans, but at the margins, additional funding really will not do a whole lot for that in our view. So instead, we fund what we call infrastructure, underfunded kinds of things that are there for a longer period of time than just sort of these up and down of the election cycle. State Democratic parties, but also grassroots groups that we're talking about today. And we're doing them in pairs, which I'll talk about, and that's what we're doing them again tonight, in terms of state pairs, I should say. Early money, of course, is very crucial. It's crucial for campaigns, but it's also crucial for what these people do, because it takes time to scale up the kind of groundwork and organizing that they need to do to be effective. And we also think that there's so much more value to having a national federal trifecta that we think it's particularly important to focus on the US Senate, which we think is the hardest of the three things to accomplish, but is not getting as much support as we think it could or should, and that we can do all three at the same time. And lastly, in a different sphere, in a way, we really think legislatures are incredibly important, both for what they do intrinsically, things like voting rights, gerrymandering, abortion, and so forth. But also we think having good legislature candidates really helps us get our up ballot statewide and congressional candidates elected as well. So we just are going to be doing more of that later in the year. We haven't started that yet, but we will. And we see a lot of opportunity. There's so much opportunity that we're having to make some tough choices in a way to be ambitious, but not overly ambitious, I think. So we're trying to basically work in 7 roughly primary states that are important to Biden. Also Ohio and Montana, very important for the Senate, though we're not doing that tonight. And then House races as part of that, and state legislature races in most of these states as well. So one thing people probably have a good sense of, but just to show you how narrow the playing field really is and what we really have to do, and why Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are so important for their electoral votes. Basically, there's about 225 electoral votes that are pretty safe for us. We got to get to 270. Having Pennsylvania and Wisconsin is a huge part of that. But even with them, we still have a gap of 16. And if you look at what else is kind of on the potential here, there's not all that much more. And so we can't really afford to lose 19 or 10 electoral votes of that blue wall, partly because we think that Georgia, in my view, is actually, I say here, pretty iffy. I would like to see us win in Georgia, and the Biden campaign is going to be there, of course, strongly. I just feel like our chances are not that good. But here's the other thing is, we really want and need to win decisively. If we just end up with 270, 271 electoral votes, we know what the opposition is going to do. They're going to raise a big ruckus. There's going to be the biggest ruckus you ever. You're already hearing people saying they aren't going to accept the election. So we're trying to play in these set of states, work with your help. And of course, it's not just president. These two states are very important for the U.S. Senate. They're important House races, U.S. House races, and the legislature. Pennsylvania, we just won the state House. Wisconsin, as I think most people pretty much know, because of this great victory that people came together to get the Supreme Court election a year ago last April. There now are good maps in Wisconsin. And we have a decent shot of winning the assembly. And we actually really need to win the assembly. We'll make some progress in the Senate, but also in the assembly in Wisconsin. That will give us a chance to sort of break the stranglehold that the Republicans have in the legislature. And we know polling is very tight. I won't talk about polling unless somebody asks a question. So we call this a nice metaphor. We call it the three-legged stool. It's great the candidates are well supported. We like to support the state Democratic Party, but we really think grassroots groups are just so important to get things done. And okay, so then the question is, well, Jim, thanks for saying that, but what are these grassroots groups and why are they so important? Well, I like, first of all, there are a lot of different kinds of them. I mean, they're not just one prototype or cookie cutter, but they do things longer term. And one of their major advantages is they're there. They don't go away. They may get sort of attenuated, but they're still there year in, year out, doing important things like voter registration. I won't go through all these things, but also year in and year out, but they're doing local issue and community support. It could be water, it could be literacy, it could be housing. They do that, then those are good things for them to do, but also it gives them credibility with the communities that they work in. So then at election time, they get much more intensive about voter mobilization and voter registration. Again, recognize that there are the C3 tax deductible groups and the C4s that are much more political. And so there's a mixture of that in this mix, but they work it out and they do a really good job for us and for them. Now, as Corey mentioned, we're actually supporting three groups today. Make the Road in Pennsylvania has both a C3 and a C4. Power to the Polls is just a C4 and their PAC, but they're just on the C4 side. But we wanted to do a C3 in Wisconsin too, and we looked around pretty carefully, and we came across this Wisconsin Native Vote C3 that's really very good, working with the tribal leadership, helping them get registered, helping them turn out to vote. There are significant obstacles for them to vote. But when they vote, they are very solidly with us. They're, for the most part, very blue. They're among the bluest voters that there are out there. And as we know, Wisconsin, was won in 2020 by 10,000 votes. So we know all these things can make a big difference. All right. So again, just to review what we're talking about, Make the Road has a C3 and a C4. We're going to hear from Diana Robinson. I just talked about Wisconsin Native Vote, and then Power to the Polls Wisconsin is great. We're going to hear from Mandela Barnes in just a few seconds, actually. But we have a fairly ambitious goal of $300,000 altogether. I did put in the chat that we've already raised $156,000 as of a few minutes ago. So we're really hoping that we'll make a lot of progress toward getting to that goal today. There's a C3 link and there's a C4 link. If for some reason you prefer one state to the other, you can use the customized thing within ActBlue. But we really appreciate all that you're going to be doing for us and for our country. So I'm now just going to turn it over to Mandela. And as these folks know, we don't do long introductions in the interest of time, so we'll leave it to him to talk about himself and what his great group is doing. Over to you.
Hey, just want to say thank you so much. And it's weird for me because usually I'm not so brief, but I'm going to do my best to make this as succinct as possible. Just want to thank everybody for being here, for joining tonight, and for also taking a moment to hear about the work of Power to the Polls, an organization I'm so honored to be a part of. And I want to just thank you for all the incredible work that 31st Street is doing to make real change across the entire country. Like I said, I'm excited to be here, and also want to acknowledge Jonathan Jarman, who's here in the audience, who's the executive director of Power to the Polls. And as Jim mentioned, my name is Mandela Barnes. I had the privilege of serving as Wisconsin's lieutenant governor, the 45th person to serve in that position, and actually the first Black person to serve in that role in Wisconsin. But 2 years ago, I ran one of the closest Senate races in our state's history, came within just 26,000 votes of being the only Democrat in the country to unseat a Republican senator last cycle. That comes out to just about 1%. And while the race was disappointing and heartbreaking to say the least, coming up short, was not in a position, did not have the luxury to just walk away. And that's because I want to continue to make a difference in how we help progressive candidates and causes in Wisconsin. And I want to be on the forefront, tackling the very issues that we face when it comes to mobilizing Black and brown voters. And that's what led me to becoming president of Power to the Polls, to put all my efforts into transforming what it means to mobilize communities of color across my entire home state. So got a little slide show for you, and going to answer some questions. One, what is Power to the Polls? Put simply, Power to the Polls is a Black-led organization created by civil rights leaders, faith leaders, labor unions, and activists from all across the state. And we are a 501c4, but we also have a federal super PAC that we do a lot of our work from. And our goal is to fundamentally change the way that we approach organizing and mobilizing Black, brown, and working class communities in the state, to give power to the people that are too often left behind, to also remove barriers to the ballot box. Now, some people may be asking, why is this necessary? And I'll tell you a number of reasons why. First being is that we continue to see less and less engagement from Black voters. People are frustrated. People are upset. They don't see either party changing their lives for the better. They don't feel like they've had a voice at any level. This isn't new, but it's truly coming to a head at this point. And we've also seen the polls that show their support for Democratic candidates, and the president is slipping with each passing month. Now, if these trends are to continue, then we lose. We lose our right to choose. We lose our right to vote. We lose the very fabric of democracy itself. To answer other questions, why is this happening? Some people blame policy. Some people blame misinformation. But the real issue, in my opinion, is engagement. I don't think we're talking to people enough. We aren't necessarily meeting them where they are, and we aren't doing it in ways that resonate. And this is why the current way we mobilize Black voters does not work. First, it's always late. Campaigns come in, they hold on to their money as long as they can, and then they try to spend it on a large number of low-impact conversations over the last few months. And it's not their fault. It's just the nature of campaigns. But I can tell you that is no way to build trust. Trust can't be built when you only show up to ask for somebody's vote. It also doesn't meet voters where they are. Now, campaigns and organizations often approach organizing communities of color the same way. They pay an out-of-state firm to build a paid canvas for the last 6 weeks of the race. And these canvases are almost never tied into a larger communication strategy, one that should involve digital and radio, texting, mail, relational organizing, social media, and even local influencer efforts. And it's often done by people outside the community, people who don't have an attachment or trust with the people that they're trying to persuade and mobilize. So these are our challenges. And if we want to reverse those engagement trends, if we truly want to build trust and support, it's important for us to act. And that's exactly where Power to the Polls comes in. We are working to fundamentally change the way that we engage and mobilize key constituencies by tackling those three challenges head on. We're building year-round infrastructure because we know that when we knock on doors before an election happens, we seem to have more engagement. People are willing to listen. When we do this work with people who live and work and have trust built up with their neighbors, their colleagues, and friends, you also get better results at the doors because that trust breaks down barriers. It lets us have honest conversations about how policy has impacted folks' lives, how they can get access to resources, and what's really at stake at 2024 and beyond. Because when our canvassers are familiar with the issues, with the communities that they're knocking on doors, and it makes it that much easier. It makes the conversations resonate that much deeper. And we're also meeting people where they are. We're using the latest tools and technology because one conversation is not enough. We have to have sustained conversations with people over multiple months in all the different ways that they consume information, whether it's social media, streaming services, or anything in between. And for us to be able to combat the right-wing disinformation, we need to invest in communicating on all the platforms that we have at our disposal. And that's exactly what we have been doing. And we've seen significant success in doing so. In 2023, we helped elect Justice Janet Protasewicz, which flipped the Wisconsin Supreme Court for the first time in at least 15 years. Now, not only did we knock on 90,000 doors with over 175 organizers, we made huge investments in digital and Black radio and texting and direct mail communication. Now, in every precinct that we targeted, turnout increased more among our targets than it did among the rest of the general public in Wisconsin. And just this past spring, it was our work that flipped the Green Bay City Council. And we defeated several far-right MAGA council members, giving a progressive majority to the Green Bay Council for the first time, and I couldn't tell you when. And we also helped win Milwaukee Public School referendum, which we did win in the face of dogged opposition from big business groups. And so we know that our efforts can work, but the key for us is to build off of that. Because here's the problem we continue to face. You have all seen the poll numbers. Many people simply have no idea what the president has done. They don't know about the investments he's made in communities. They don't know about the jobs that he's helped create. They don't know about the resources he's made available. And we're doing the hard work to change that. We've been on doors since last September, long before any election rolls around, giving community members information on how they can save money right now, whether it's the savings on their prescription drugs or their energy bills through energy efficiency upgrades that they can get for their homes, or through the Affordable Connectivity Program that saves them $30 a month on their internet bill. Now, we've knocked on over 87,000 doors in September. We've already seen the impact. And as our organizers are reporting back, more and more voters being able to identify the ways that they can benefit from the Biden administration. So to talk quickly about our plan for 2024, there are four main elements. There's door-to-door contact, there's relational organizing, there's qualitative research, and then there's paid media. The most critical component of the work of Power to the Polls is direct voter contact and engagement. Now, we've been able to identify just over 200,000 voters that we need to engage this year. And these voters fall into two main groups. The first is Black and brown voters who are still skeptical of Democrats and the president, and they still need to be persuaded. A high number of these voters are Black men who are considering voting for Donald Trump. The second group, many people call infrequent voters, but we like to call them high opportunity voters over here. These are people who we know will support progressive candidates and causes, but for a number of reasons, they are more likely to stay home. And we want to knock on their doors 3 to 4 times before Election Day. That's over 600,000 door knocks, all happen over the course of many months, not just bunched up around election time. And not only will we be talking to them about what the president has done, we will be helping new residents register to vote, encouraging voting by mail and in-person early voting, and ensuring that they have the information and documents that they need to vote on Election Day. And we'll also be continuing to pioneer relational organizing in key areas around Wisconsin. Relational organizing allows people in the community to reach out directly to their friends, their family, their neighbors, anybody they're in regular contact with, and encourage them to get involved and vote. Now, while validators and candidates are often met with skepticism by many of our target voters, hearing directly from a family member, from a friend, or a family churchgoer can be the key to breaking down these barriers. Our current plan will add 175,000 additional relational conversations on top of the work that we're doing on doors. Now, while door-to-door contact is at the heart of the work that we do, we can't make the same mistake that others have done by keeping these voters in a silo. They need to hear from us across multiple platforms, as I mentioned before, meeting them where they are at every point in their day. Now, think about your own days. People are on phones, you're watching TV, you're listening to radio or streaming podcasts, or scrolling social media. Now, Power to the Polls uses validators, we'll use local influencers, and community and congregational leaders to deliver impactful messages to voters via these critical mediums. Now, you can see from the chart at the bottom how Black voters, you can see the chart about how Black voters in Wisconsin can be reached. The thing that stands out here is how important digital and streaming are, with 86% of Black voters reachable on digital and 76% on streaming. That's exactly where these voters are, and that's exactly where we're going to be. Now, lastly, we want Power to the Polls to be a driving force in understanding the community better and learning how to communicate with these critical voters. Research has been incredibly important to me, not just polling, but on the ground research, where we engage with community members. We find out what is and what is not motivating them. We discuss what they like to see out of their elected officials and make sure that the messages that we're delivering in our campaigns are actually resonating. And we're also going to continue to test out our own tactics, because too many organizations get set in their ways and they don't change themselves to grow, to adapt, or to learn from past efforts. And that's why we're working with the Analyst Institute to create data-driven tests of our programs, so you can be sure that your investments are used in the most efficient ways possible. So how can you help? Overall, our goal is to raise just over $5.5 million to run this program. But I like to think of it as this: for every $75,000 to $100,000 that we're able to raise, Power to the Polls can knock on 20 to 25,000 doors, additional doors in key areas like Milwaukee and Racine and Green Bay. We can pay for 2 to 3 additional weeks of Black radio in Milwaukee. We can create $1.5 million to $2 million additional digital and streaming video impressions amongst our target voters. That's an incredible impact, and it matters, because Wisconsin's going to come down to 20,000 votes. That was the difference when Donald Trump won in 2016. It was the difference when Joe Biden flipped it back in 2020. That was the difference, that's the number of voters who can flip our state legislature. My race last cycle was decided by just over 20,000 votes, and that's what it's going to come down to again. Now, as we all know, Wisconsin is likely to be the tipping point state in 2024. And we are going to do our damnedest to make sure that it tips in the right direction. So just want to say thanks so much, everybody, for having us. And thank you for taking the time to listen.
Wow, that was a lot packed into a short period of time. We're just going to go proceed directly to Diana and hear about what's happening in Pennsylvania. Diana?
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Good evening and good afternoon to those of you that are joining us from the West Coast. I'm Diana Robinson. I'm co-deputy director at Make the Road Pennsylvania. We're a statewide organization that's based in Allentown and Reading, Philadelphia, and we just recently expanded to Hazleton. And we organize in Black, Latino, and working class communities of color. And a lot of the work we do is very similar to what Mandela was just describing. We're year-round talking to our neighbors, our families, and our community about the importance of voting, but also about the issues that they care about. And I think a point that was made that was really important, and I saw in the chat there was a question: how are we moving voters? How are we talking to people to motivate them to get out to vote? For us, this is a year-round dedication to our community, knowing that voting is a tactic that we can use to build power, but continuing to hold folks we elect accountable and things like that, and building power takes more than just doing that. And so we have a year-round canvas. We have about 10 canvassers who are in each of our cities, who are talking to people year-round. We have this program called Voter to Member, where we're talking to people at the doors via text messages, and inviting them to meetings and things like that. So as Jim mentioned, Make the Road Pennsylvania, we have a C3 and a C4. Make the Road Pennsylvania is our C3 organization, where we do all our nonpartisan work. So just this past primary, we registered about 1,000 new voters from March to April. Our primary was April 23rd, so we had a pretty short turnaround. So we registered about 1,000 new voters. In addition to that, we knocked on over 8,600 doors, nonpartisan to turnout voters. And we had mail-in ballot parties where people returned their ballots in groups to a drop box, and to really bring joy to voting. And just given in our state, there's been a lot of attacks on drop boxes. There've been removal of drop boxes. There's been attacks on voting by mail. So this was a process to really encourage people to vote by mail, but also doing it as a fun activity, something that people did in groups was really great. And so for this upcoming general, we are planning to register in addition 11,000 folks across the 5 cities that we work in, and about turning out to vote or knocking on about 25,000 doors to turn out voters, nonpartisan, and doing a lot of election protection work. We were at the polls also this primary election, and we plan to do that during the general election. In addition to that's all our nonpartisan work that we do have our C4 organization, Make the Road Action Pennsylvania, where we endorse candidates and we run full programs. And, you know, as Jim mentioned, in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of work to do. We want to keep our majority in the state house, and we want to have a higher majority in the state house. You know, in Pennsylvania, our minimum wage has been stagnant. It hasn't been raised in close to 20 years. It remains at $7.25. And that's due to our state legislature being the way it is. We have a Republican majority in our Senate, now a very slim majority House Democrats, and so we need to change that. And so what we see a priority is our state legislature along with up the ballot. So we have a great opportunity in Lehigh County in House District 137. Anna Thomas is a Democrat running against the incumbent who is a Republican. She ran in 2022 and lost by about 500 votes. So we think we have an opportunity to flip that seat, and we're really excited about that. We also have Congressional District 7 with Susan Wild, which is going to be really important. And Ryan McKenzie is someone who was running against her, who is, we had an action earlier this year, he's very anti-immigrant. And then we also have Congressional District 8, Matt Cartwright. And then we have Congressional District 1, Fitzpatrick, where we see an opportunity potentially if there's an opportunity to flip that seat. And then obviously there's the US Senate seat. You know, in 2022, we were able to have 2 Democrats representing Pennsylvania, which is really important to keep that. And I think for us, one of the things that we find is really important is that year-round conversation with community and what we're invested in. We're going to be back knocking on doors in June and really focused on hearing from people. What are the things that matter to them to inform our messaging and how we're moving people, and understanding that our people are not a monolith. We primarily focus on Latino voters, but also Black voters, and understanding that our messaging has to be flexible. One size does not fit all, and we need to listen and hear from folks to be able to know what matters to them. And they need to see the difference. And I think they're not seeing a major difference. And that's what we're hearing from all the polling and all the data. This, you know, for this general election, this past primary election, we were able to knock over 46,000 doors in the primary from March to April, very short period of time. And the 3 counties that we were working in. For this upcoming general election, we want to knock 450,000 doors. Our goal is to get to 500,000 doors, 500,000. In 2022, we knocked over 310,000 doors. So we feel pretty confident that we can do it. And I think one of the key things is for us, all our programs are run in English and Spanish. One big difference for community is talking to someone in the language that they feel most comfortable. And also with trusted messengers in the community, we're launching a Guardians of Democracy program, which is a relational program where our members are talking to their neighbors and friends in their own neighborhood and turning them out to vote. In addition to that, we'll have digital programming We had a pretty successful campaign in 2022 with Spanish-speaking influencers on TikTok that was talking about the upcoming election and the importance. In 2022, we did do some cool things. We had a flyover banner at a Phillies game for the Senate race that said Dr. Oz is a Yankees fan. No offense to the Yankees fans. And in addition to that, there was a Taylor Swift concert, and we endorsed a candidate for mayor, and we were like Swifties for Helen Gim. So we're excited to try different things, but really meet people where they are. And I think validating what people are feeling, because, when people are struggling, they're dealing with a lot of problems, and we have to be cognizant of that. And really understand where people are coming from and learn from them to then be able to motivate people and understand that rightfully so, people are struggling, and that, this isn't front of mind to them, right? So having those opportunities to really have those deep conversations and start those conversations early is really important to move the conversation forward. I'll stop there, but thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Diana. I think we're going to now hear from my sister, Mary, who has some words for us.
Hi, my name is Mary Shelton Pence, and I'd like to give you my perspective on this moment in this election cycle, May 15th, 2024, a little less than 6 months until the election. And there's a lot of political news right now, presidential debates, polling, trials. Meanwhile, we grassroots activists are working away, largely unseen and largely unacknowledged. We are increasing our numbers, raising money, doing voter registration, canvassing, writing letters, and there are thousands of us. My brother Jim's now going to put up a graphic which captures my perspective.
Hold on. Here we go.
Each of you on this call is represented as one of the thin green roots underneath the soil, channeling nutrients to what will be successful Democratic candidates in November. The impact of what we are doing is powerful and cumulative, and I believe will pay off when the results are announced in November. So I want to thank you for being on this call, for co-hosting, for reaching out to others to join 31st Street, but most of all for recognizing the power of early money, which will allow these awesome groups to scale up. In my mind, the easiest thing to do is to give money, and it's going to be different amounts based on the circumstances of different people. But here's my request. Whatever you had planned to contribute tonight, my request is that you increase it. For my husband Dan and me, the amount we are contributing is $6,000. As a result of the careful research that 31st Street has done for us, we know that our contribution is going to be spent effectively. And we can think of no better way to spend our $6,000. So would you please take a moment to grapple with this question? Thinking of yourself as one of those thin green lines, one of those roots in my graphic, what is the amount by which you want to nourish the work of these groups in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania? And then make your contribution or increase your contribution accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary. And I hope everybody takes your sage advice. The links are in the chat to donate if you need them. And Jim has just announced we've reached $188,000, which is absolutely incredible. I am Aaron Hamburger. I am the membership person at 31st Street Swing Left, and along with my very talented partner in crime, Adele Dari. And I am also the person who fields the questions in Q&A for our events such as these. So a number of people have been asking questions in the chat. I've been collecting those, and I will curate them and field them to our guest speakers, Mandela and Diana. So one question that keeps coming up, and Diana sort of addressed it in the chat as well, is C3, C4, which one should I donate to? And basically the advantage of donating to C3, you get a nice little tax deduction. Tax deductible activity, though, cannot be partisan activity. So C4, which is not tax deductible, that will be more targeted toward partisan use. And you know, we're partisans. We want to elect Democrats. All right, here are some questions that have come up, and maybe I'll start with Mandela. Are you paying influencers on social media? I think that was the question. And also, will you be focusing on down ballot races as well as the top ticket races? Oh, I think Mandela is busy doing something right now. So I'm going to actually pivot over to Diana, and I'm sure Mandela will be back with us in a minute.
Also, Corey could answer the question, I think, if he's on.
Okay, Cor.
Yeah,
Corey
very much.
McCain. McCain.
Yes to both of the questions. Yes,
Yeah.
we are definitely going to be working with influencers, content creators from across Wisconsin and across the country who are, you know, specifically, you know, incredibly popular and have a lot of following within our target audience. We will, of course, be paying them and working with them really just to develop some incredible content across the board, which we're very, very excited about what all of that is going to look like. And can you give me the second part of that question again? I'm so sorry, Aaron.
So will you be focusing on down ballot races as well?
Yeah. So this is one of the really exciting things, that when the new maps came out, how much overlap existed within our turf. There are no less than, I think, 12 targeted legislative seats in our turf, especially in the Milwaukee, Green Bay, Racine, Sheboygan, Appleton area. And so we were really, really excited to see that. I think Jim mentioned just what the map looks like right now. You know, the hope is that we can pick up 2 to 3 Senate seats this cycle. We're probably not going to get the majority back, but we can win that Green Bay Senate seat. We can win that Northern Milwaukee suburban Senate seat. We can win that Appleton Senate seat. All of those are in our turf, and we have literally tens of thousands of voters, especially high opportunity voters that exist in those seats. And then on the assembly side, I think there's a very real chance that we can flip the assembly. You know, we have, I think, 7 to 8 assembly seats, targeted assembly seats within our turf, where if we're able to turn out 500 to 1,000 voters in those assembly seats, which we very much believe we can, that is going to get us very close to an assembly majority, which is very, very exciting. So yes, it's a huge part of our program. We designed it that way so that the impact that we can have is both obviously at the top of the ticket with President Biden and Tammy Baldwin, which is going to be a very tight Senate race in Wisconsin, but then very real opportunities here to win legislative seats.
Great. Thank you so much. Diana, I have some questions for you. Do you partner with Field Team 6? And also, are there similar groups to yours working in the Pittsburgh area or other cities in Southwest Pennsylvania?
Yes, so we have great partner organizations that we work with across the state. So in Pittsburgh, there's PA United as well as One PA. And so those are some close groups that we work with in Pittsburgh. And I would have to get back to you about some of the other groups. They're right now not coming to mind, but for Pittsburgh, there's also One Hood in Pittsburgh as well.
Great. And Diana, while I have you here, and Corey, maybe you can also speak to this as well, because this is a question for both of you. What are some of the major issues for your constituency? Is reproductive freedom, the abortion debate, is that a major issue? Are you receiving many questions about Gaza? How are you answering those? So maybe speaking to key issues. So Diana, you can start, and then Corey, you can follow up.
Yeah, so the main issues that we've been seeing since 2022, cost of living comes up a lot for folks. Just not being able to afford things. Something else that comes up is around community safety across Pennsylvania and the cities that we're in. And reproductive rights actually does is something, abortion rights is something that does come up often and is really important for our voters and folks in our communities. So those are some issues that are coming up. Around Gaza, we did hear a lot from youth and our youth members. There were a lot of folks in certain communities and in Pennsylvania that did vote uncommitted in these primary elections. So we do foresee it being ongoing. And our Make the Road States organization is part of calling for a ceasefire, and that's how we responded for that.
Okay.
And just
Great.
on our end, I actually want to toss it over to Jonathan Jarman, our executive director. And Jonathan is literally in the field every day with our folks and talking to our organizers, and they can give a very good readout on the kinds of things that people are hearing about.
Please.
Hello, everyone. So we are currently hearing a lot about cost of living. Folks are just noticing that stuff is more expensive and that they are quite frankly are struggling. And so a lot of our conversations right now are talking to folks about, what do they want to see their elected officials doing? What are the issues? Like, we're talking to them about their issues. So we're also hearing crime as an issue. And we are also hearing about Gaza, but not how you would expect it to be talked about. We are hearing about people that are upset that we are sending money places when there are people struggling in America. And so we've heard people talk about it a little bit differently. And I actually think Mandela's back on if he has anything.
Yeah, no, I am back. I think this is definitely better, more of a question for you to be able to take on.
Great. And while I have you both here, and whoever feels more qualified to answer this question, are you working at all with Ben Wickler or coordinating any efforts, as he has received a lot of national attention for his organizing?
Coordinating where legally allowed. He was kind enough to hop on a donor briefing that we hosted a few months back, and he kicked us off and gave a glowing recommendation of our work.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. We're very excited about all the wonderful victories happening in Wisconsin, and we know how much that is due to your organizing and Ben's organizing and the party there. I hope the rest of the Democratic parties are taking notes all over in these key states. A question that just popped up in the chat, and both you and Diana maybe can speak to this a little bit more. Do you have a sense that the uncommitted people in the primaries will vote for Biden in the general election? And Diana wrote very likely. I'm wondering, Diana, maybe you want to speak to that, and then maybe Mandela, you can give your point of view, why you think that is likely or not likely.
Well, just given the folks who were organizing around that campaign in Pennsylvania, I think it was a tactic to draw attention to what was happening and just really help move forward with a ceasefire. But I think people understand the realities of what's happening with this election. So I do believe that is likely, but I do think that nothing is set in stone. And I think there's a lot of work to do to talk to voters and to hear where they're coming from and to have those deep conversations to really understand what matters to voters and what will motivate them to vote. And similar to what Mandela was saying earlier, it can't happen a month or 2 months before an election. It has to happen much earlier so that folks don't feel that they are not equipped, don't have the tools, don't have the information to vote because someone is talking to them about a candidate really late when it, aside from the presidential, which people will be bombarded with. But I do think that there's work to be done because people are struggling and there's a lot that people are feeling in this moment.
Yeah. And I'll say, like I mentioned, the 20,000 vote number all the time, there were nearly 47,000 uninstructed votes. And we all lived through 2016, assuming that people were going to show up for, our candidate because it was the right candidate, the best candidate to show up for, to, do the work. And we got, dealt a real harsh reality, which, speaks to the point that we need to just continue engaging people. And I think that, you see some of the more recent statements from Biden, it appears that, there is some, listening to folks who have voted uninstructed. But that wasn't a whole lot of power to the polls, 250,000 universe. Like I just that's just not, it wasn't, deeply, penetrated in the 250,000 targets that we have as power to the polls.
Got it. Thank you for that. I have a quick
So,
question.
Aaron,
Oh.
Barbara Woodall wrote, she was wondering about the Wisconsin.
I was just going to get to that.
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead.
You took the words right out of my mouth. We're so excited.
I know.
Jim, so another group that is part of our fundraiser tonight is Wisconsin Native Voice. And we don't have a representative for them here tonight, but Jim, maybe you can just talk a little bit about how they would use funds that we raise for them.
Sorry, was that for me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, right. I tried to give a little bit of flavor for that. They are a C3. So it to some extent, they a lot of their local issues are, environmental kinds of issues, water rights and so forth, pollution of one type or another that they work with the communities on, and on that side of it. But, they do the standard things of voter registration and voter mobilization, voter turnout, election time. It happens that on our conversation, they mentioned that the U.S. Public Health Service, Indian Health Service, all their health facilities also have voter registration, which is something that our administration put in place. So they work with those facilities since they're medical people, health people. So that's just one example of what they do. Over.
Okay, thank you. A few questions have been coming in about the economy, and it's interesting. I've been seeing a lot of questions about Gaza in the chat, and yet, of course, polls have been showing that actually that sort of ranks low on the list of people's priorities, and the economy and inflation keeps coming up at the top. So a question, how can we capitalize on the improved economy when so many people express concerns about the increased cost of living? It seems Democratic messaging on the economy is not working. How are the administration's infrastructure initiatives identified and received, for example? So how can we have a conversation with people who are expressing concerns about inflation in the economy? And yeah, those, the stock market may be great, but I go to the grocery store and eggs are expensive. So, I don't know if Diana wants to speak to that, and then if Mandela or Jonathan, either one, if you want to speak to how to talk about the economy.
Yeah, I think for us, we've really been focused on what's been happening in state and then going up the ballot. Because I think when we start at the top of the ballot, it disengages people and people have very strong opinions. So for us, we've been talking about, and specifically in Pennsylvania, you know, that our minimum wage hasn't gone up in 20 years, and that's because of Republicans in the state Senate, who want to raise our wage don't want to raise it, right? So I think having those conversations that are really rooted in people's day-to-day lives are really important. And I think that's why it's so important for us to be talking to people, understanding how they're viewing issues, but also how are we talking to people in a way that makes sense to them? You know, a lot of the stuff is super complicated, explaining the infrastructure bills and all that stuff. So how are we talking to people about the real changes that they can see, that make a difference in their day-to-day lives?
Okay, great. And Jonathan or Mandela, I don't know who wants to speak about that.
I mean, you want to go ahead, Jonathan? I mean, it's just you got more of the day-to-day feedback than I do.
Yes. Could you ask the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Sure, that's fine. You know, how do we talk to voters about the economy and inflation, since that is such a major concern that you've been hearing a lot as you've been talking to voters? How, you know, it seems like the Democratic messaging on the economy is not breaking through.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is talking to these folks to figure out, to get a sense of what they feel isn't working for them. I think, as Mandela mentioned, we're doing a lot of research on whatever specific issues that we want to talk to folks about. But I think a lot of folks also just don't know what has happened. And as we talk to folks and we connect them to resources, that they start to see that things have really happened in the community. I don't know if there. I think we just have to re-examine about how we talk to folks about this. So I know we are doing a ton of research now to figure out what is the best way to communicate the accomplishments. Uh, I mean, we have to let folks know that this is just the beginning. This is just the building blocks, and like as he President Biden stays in office and continues to do the work to solve the issues that they're facing, that they will see some type of difference.
Great, thank you. You know, one thing that I'm hearing from, you know, both organizations is simply the power of having these conversations. And I will never forget, you know, how many times that I would go canvassing and talk to people and they would say, nobody ever listens to me. Nobody ever asked for my vote. Nobody ever just had a conversation with me. And I love that both of these organizations, and I know that this is true of Wisconsin Votes as well, Native Votes, that you prioritize not just having a conversation like the night before the election, but having a sustained conversation. And that takes time, that takes effort, and that takes resources. And so that's why we're here tonight. And I hope that everybody can, you know, find it within their hearts to keep that work going, because it's just so important. Now we are at the 8 o'clock hour at 31st Street. We always pride ourselves on starting and ending on time. But we are happy to stay around for a little bit and answer more questions, you know, for folks who are willing and able for another 15 minutes. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who came out, who donated, who listened, who spread the word to their friends. This is so important, and we really appreciate all of you. So if you do need to drop off, we totally understand. We promise 7 to 8, but if you can, if you want to stick around, ask some more questions, we are happy to entertain those. Now, one thing that I know you all spoke about Gaza before, but it's coming up again. People are really concerned, like, how do we talk to these young people who may feel disaffected and we need them to get on board? What can we say to somebody to convince them to still pull the lever for Biden? If anybody has I know you spoke a little bit about that, but maybe if you want to revisit that. Maybe Diana, do you have a good idea on that?
Yeah, I think similar to any other group of voters, we have to talk to them, and we have to talk to them about what matters to them. You know, hearing from their peers, and validating the things that they're feeling, but also like showing what is the real difference and what is the impact, I think is important. So I think those deep conversations are important. We'll be doing focus groups in the 5 states that Make the Road is in. And we'll be doing some polling with Latino voters. And so I think a lot of that's going to be important. I think as any good organizer, we have to listen so that we know what motivates people, what's going to move people.
Great. Mandela, what do you think? What would
And
you say?
I would say, I mean, the one of the big reasons for supporting, Biden over Trump for a lot of us on this call is for democracy itself, and for people for anybody, I should say, who has a grievance with decisions made by the government, like the opportunity to have that grievance, to be able to protest in public space, to be able to petition your elected representatives on any issue, be it the economy or be it foreign affairs, is something that we can't take for granted. And I also tell people all the time, just because, not even with this election and speeches that I give, I say just because, the person you wanted to get elected got elected doesn't mean all the things you want will happen. And it's important for you to stay engaged, to be able to make your case heard, and to continue doing the organizing work. And just because, the person you don't want to get elected doesn't mean you should let them just get away scot-free with, totally governing against your interests. So democracy doesn't start and end on election day is, my conversation to anybody who's thinking about whether they're staying away or not. It's like, I wish I was able to vote for somebody I agree with completely on every issue. And it's the reason why I ran for office the very first time, because I thought that I could do the job better.
And I what John Medaglia, who's on our leadership committee, said, democracy is a verb, not a noun. So I think that goes along with what you're saying as well. And a number of people are pointing out how Trump's positions on so many of these issues are, if you don't like Biden, try out Trump. Not going to be something that people would like. A note from somebody in the chat. I am from Wisconsin, and I greatly appreciate your work, your presentations, and this program, Mandela. So yay you. And I appreciate your work with Wisconsin Task Force on Climate Change. Have climate change impacts such as extreme heat and wildfire smoke in Wisconsin and energy costs been coming up in conversations?
So outside of Power to the Polls, I started a group to continue that work of the task force. It's a C3 organization called Forward Together Wisconsin, and we are focused on IRA implementation. So those energy costs are, what we lead with when we do those C3 doors. And for a few months, Power to the Polls was also doing those IRA implementation doors, talking to people about their energy costs, telling them ways they could save money. We had a QR code on our lit where people can just scan it right at the door. So we didn't have to wait to see if people would sign up or enroll in some of the programs. We helped them right there at the door. So haven't necessarily had the wildfire smoke conversations or, extreme heat conversations, although I suspect we will this summer. But energy costs, certainly, for sure.
Great. Okay. Wow. This has just been an incredible hour. Does anyone else have any questions that you would like to ask? You can put them in the chat, or you can raise a virtual hand. We can call on you. Oh, here's one that just popped in. Maybe Diana, you can just speak to this. Is there a single issue that most of the voters you've reached are concerned about? I'm assuming it's cost of living. Is there a silver bullet?
You are right. It is cost of living, whether it's about jobs, the economy, wages, it's cost of living. Yes. So I think that's one of the major issues facing folks right now.
Jonathan, I see you nodding as well. You've been hearing that at the doors. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the main thing that we hear on the doors, just things being so expensive and folks struggling.
Yeah, it's a tough issue. There's no doubt about it. All right. Anybody else who has a question?
I just want to say thank you. thank you to everybody who's come and to our presenters. You're the people doing the hard work. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your philosophy and your approach with us.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely. Quick question. How do you respond on the cost of living? Have you found like a good response? I know you were saying you're doing focus groups, but Diana, did you have one?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania specific, something since we've been focused a lot on our state legislature is talking about one of the reasons our minimum wage hasn't increased and all the surroundings states around us have, it's because of the Republicans in our state Senate and the importance of electing new folks and electing folks that we can get those folks out, and a long-term plan that we need to flip our state Senate. So I think those conversations, but also talking about the real changes that candidates that we support have done to support candidates who have introduced bills to raise the minimum wage, candidates who've been part of eviction moratoriums, things like that. So really lifting up what has been done. And just agitating people like, yeah, that's why we need you to get out and vote, because we need to change this. We need to impact this.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
I found one thing that was helpful with the conversations that we had when people talked about just cost of living is some of the actions President Biden has taken to get rid of junk fees, where you have credit card fees and whatever other types of junk fees that is taking money out of people's pockets each month.
The other thing I would say too, and Jonathan was mentioning this, and one of our organizers who was on one of our presentations the other day brought up the fact that when they talk about the pro-worker things that Biden has done, that also breaks through when people find out that the president was the first president in history to walk a picket line. You know, there's some value building there where they might not think that he solved all the problems, but he cares deeply about folks who are working day in and day out just to get by. You know, some of those I think have been very impactful as well.
That's great. It's really great. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. And Sharon Fitzgerald, I see that you have raised your hand if you want to unmute and just ask your question.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I was wondering, since both of the groups seem to focus on minority communities and Black and Brown communities, I'm wondering, and we're also discussing like the infrastructure, the economy. I was wondering how your activities are connecting with the working, like the overall working class in, PA and in Wisconsin. Like, the union, President Biden's visit to that union was really incredible. And I watched it on TV, but the connection between the white working class, between the working class people, Black, white, brown in both states. I'm just wondering how those threads are being, met.
Yeah, absolutely. Diana, you want to go first?
Sure. As part of our state table, we work with a plethora of organizations, like in the Lehigh Valley, and particularly work with PA Stands Up, which primarily works with mostly white working class folks and other groups. But when we're outdoor knocking, our priority is to turn out Black and Brown voters, but we also talk to white working class voters as well, because oftentimes they're in the same neighborhoods. So I do think that, and we work closely with unions within our state table unit here at SEIU, our unions we work closely with. So I think there's opportunities to have that cross collaboration, but also that peer-to-peer. And building multiracial coalitions is really important for the work that we do.
Great. Mandela, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I come from labor household, and I tell my own personal story as much as I can, and being able to, express how bridging that gap between white and working class voters is actually possible, and how much people have in common that they don't realize. And, we've been proudly supported, by SEIU, AFSCME, and the work of the laborers and a lot of different organizations. Like, we exist because of collaboration. We exist in the spirit of, in the explicit spirit of coalition. And we try to promote that as a value too. And we talk to people doors.
Great. Well, hopefully we can all be in coalition to celebrate a wonderful victory in November, thanks to the great work that you all are doing. So thank you again for being here with us tonight. Thank you to all of our co-hosts and our guests and everyone else who made this possible. And have a great night, and let's keep working to victory in November.
Perfect. Thanks so much for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.